Welcome to the Explainer. All right, today we're going to dive into a pretty mind-bending idea, a theory about the physical origins of language and your very sense of self. And it all starts with how the brain manages its own internal chaos.
So, before we can even get to the big question of consciousness, we've got to start with something that seems a lot simpler. But, well, it turns out it's a puzzle that flips our whole understanding of language completely on its head.
So where does grammar come from? I mean, the obvious answer is we learn it, right? From our parents, from school, from just being around people. But what if the blueprint, the actual structure for grammar, was already wired into our brains before we ever heard a single word? And this is where it gets weird. Because if you look at the evidence, something else is going on. The research this is all based on points out this really fascinating puzzle. Babies, little tiny infants, seem to get grammatical ideas like who did what to whom way before they can even talk. And check this out, this timeline really shows you what's happening. I mean, in the first couple of months, a baby's brain is already figuring out the difference between me and not me. A few months later, it's getting cause and effect. And look, it's not until much, much later that words actually get attached to these ideas that are already there. So the whole framework for grammar seems to be in place before language even shows up. So if we don't learn it from the outside, where on earth does it come from? Well, the theory we're looking at today says the answer isn't out there in the world at all. It's inside the brain itself. And it has to do with how the brain deals with its own, well, its own internal chaos. And it does that by basically inventing two main characters. To get this, we've got to grab a key idea from this field called brain kinematics, which basically looks at the brain as a physical system. And the big concept here is the attractor field. Now, that sounds complicated, but the whirlpool analogy is just perfect. Think of it like a center of gravity for your thoughts. It's this stable, repeating pattern of activity in your brain that just pulls in related thoughts and sensations and organizes them. So instead of everything being random noise, the brain creates these little stable whirlpools to create some order. Okay, so what the brain does with these attractor fields is pretty amazing. It creates one huge, super stable attractor that represents itself. You know, that continuous feeling of I. Then, for everything else that runs into, people, objects, ideas, it creates smaller, temporary attractors, the others. Now, the really crucial thing to get here is that these aren't real. They're virtual tools. They're patterns of energy that the brain invents just to make sense of the world. So how in the world does this internal drama, this play between I and other, lead to something like language? Okay, this is where it gets really wild. The idea is that grammar isn't something we invented. It's just the words we put on top of these physical dynamics that are already happening in the brain. And this table just lays it out so clearly. You see the brain's stable attractors, that I and other? Well, those just become our nouns. Then, the physical interaction between them, what the theory calls a strain flow, that becomes our verbs. Think about a simple sentence. I throw the ball. I and the ball are the stable things, the attractors. Throw is the action, the physical dynamic, the strain flow connecting them. And the rules, syntax, that's just the brain figuring out the most energy-efficient way for that interaction to happen. So get this, when a sentence feels wrong to you, like ball the I throw, it's not because you broke some abstract rule. It's because that's literally an unstable, inefficient physical pathway for energy in your brain. Grammar isn't just rules on a page. It's physics. But, okay, this whole idea doesn't just stop with grammar. Not even close. The theory expands this out and suggests that this very same physical process could be the origin of consciousness itself. Yeah, the core idea here is that our entire conscious experience, I mean everything, what you see, what you feel, what you think, it's all just bubbling up from the constant interaction between these imaginary things, our internal I, and all the others it's constantly simulating. We're basically living inside a story that our brain is telling itself about itself. Okay, that's a huge claim. Is there any actual proof? How can we be sure that consciousness is really just an inside job? Well, the theory points to this really powerful piece of evidence that, well, you experience it every single night. Think about your dreams. Just think about it. There is zero sensory input coming in from the outside world, right? No physical objects. Your body isn't even really active. And yet, what happens? There's an I. You're there. There are others. People show up. Relationships happen. Stories unfold. A whole complete world exists. This right here shows that the brain has all the machinery it needs to generate a full-blown conscious experience, all by itself.
Okay, so if grammar and even consciousness itself are all built from these internal virtual processes, what does it actually mean for who you are, for our fundamental sense of self? And this might be the most profound takeaway of all. Yourself, that feeling of I, isn't a thing. It's not a little person sitting in your head. It's a process, a dynamic equilibrium configuration. Basically, it's a stable pattern that your brain is actively creating moment by moment by moment. It's less of a noun and way more of a verb. This completely reframes our idea of identity. And it leaves us with one last truly mind-bending question to think about. If yourself is a story that the brain is telling itself using these imaginary characters, then who or what is listening?